So you finally gave in and got that Lightspeed bundle. Now you've got this bright, shiny, amazing new Rey character. But what do you do with her? Hey, welcome back to the channel, everybody. This is Shaka from Shaka Gaming. Today we're going to be talking about GLs, specifically Rey, and teams that you might not be using with that GL that you should consider using moving forward in the future. So specifically, guys, we're going to be talking about, like I said, Rey. We're going to kind of look at a progression of where you should start at if you've unlocked Rey. Obviously, a lot of people got the Lightspeed bundle, and so they're kind of feeling that whole process out in terms of what teams are best, what to use. We're going to really look at that from a sequential standpoint and kind of progress to some teams that you may not have thought of that are going to be really, really good. With that being said, let's go ahead and switch over to the game, everybody. And we're going to look at our first team here. Our first team is a Resistance squad, primarily, all Resistance characters. The reason that we want to focus on this OG version is simply because when you get the Lightspeed bundle, if you get the Lightspeed bundle, you're going to have a lot of these characters all ready to go. So it just makes sense that this is probably the very first version of this team that you're going to use. It's a good team, don't get me wrong. Obviously, I would say your core to this team is JTR. She's an essential with Rey, in my opinion, followed by the Handbag Bros, Resistance Hero Finn, Resistance Hero Poe, and then you've got your fifth. In this case, I just threw in a tank because tanks are always good with this team, so we threw in Amelin Holdo. Now, is this team amazing? No. Are they bad? No. But there is a drastic improvement, guys, when we move to the next step of our teams here that we've got, and that is the Reylo team, everybody. So the Reylo team is what happens whenever you unlock Ben Solo. I understand he's a conquest character. A lot of you that are newer in the game may not have access to him, may not be able to get him right away. But if you did get the Lightspeed bundle and you've got Rey, you've got this whole faction unlocked and everything, guys, prioritize him immediately, because he's going to immediately boost the viability of this team. They're going to be so much better. So you need to get on this team ASAP. I would say probably the ideal version of this Reylo Resistance team is obviously Rey with JTR per usual, Ben Solo, and then I would argue the next two best characters for this probably are the Handbag Bros. The only downside to using the Handbag Bros, obviously, is if you fully invested in the Resistance faction, then you're going to be able to put together a Zori team. Now, obviously, if you haven't invested in Zori, that's a whole different story. Then this is probably the team that you're going to want to run. But I really, guys, would encourage you to invest in the entire faction. If you've gotten that bundle, even if you haven't gotten the bundle and you've invested in Rey, you might as well take that extra step and get Zori, because that team is so good. It's amazing what they're able to accomplish. And that team, really, at its core, you need Resistance Hero Finn in that team, guys. So I think it's better to take these two away, or at least one of them away, and have two very good teams than to have both of them be here and only have one good team, in my opinion. Now, I would argue, obviously, the point of this video, guys, is that we're talking about teams that you don't use or have not used. These are the two teams that probably all of you have used. These are the very most common teams that everyone starts with, everyone is very familiar with. Now, we're going to move on to the first team that I would argue is kind of the next level of gameplay, if you will, that you should look at investing in and trying to add to your roster. And that is the droid variant of this team. Pretty much standard, you're going to have JTR and Ben Solo as your core three along with Rey. You might want to get a little funky here and maybe throw out JTR and throw in maybe BB-8 or another droid if you're really going for the full droid factor with this, guys. I don't think I would advise doing that personally, but it might throw your opponent off possibly, or it might even give you a second or third Resistance team. If you don't have Zori, for instance, you could try a JTR lead Resistance team if you needed to. Just gives you some options. But the reason this team is so good, guys, in particular, so again, obviously the way the mechanics of this team work is you need to get Ben Solo down, then you need to get Rey down, then you need to defeat Ben, and then you can defeat Rey. It's a whole process. When you throw in another tank like L3, it makes it more difficult to get to Ben. The other great thing about L3 in particular is that she will cleanse a lot of those debuffs. So if you are running a Starkiller team, for instance, she can be a real pain in the butt. She's just going to constantly taunt. You're constantly getting stuff cleansed off of her, and it's really hard to get around her and get to Ben. It's possible, don't get me wrong, but she's a very big nuisance on this squad. The other big person that I would argue that should be on here is Sortie. Sortie, one, obviously helps droids a little bit, but more importantly, Sortie has protection up built into her kit. And Rey, obviously, has a lot of protection up built into her kit in terms of the entire team, the entire faction here that she's got. And that makes Sortie just insanely difficult to defeat. She is so thick, like vastly thicker than what L3 is. And because of that, you really run into a lot of timeout situations where you might actually time out against this team. It's possible with a Starkiller team, if you don't have enough offense, that you could time out here. The other factor is, because she's so hard to defeat, it can make it even more difficult to defeat Ben. Because remember, if you've got all these Omicrons on him and such, if Sortie's still around, Ben will keep coming back. Also, the entire time that's happening, Rey, JTR, is constantly upping her mastery, making her more and more and more difficult to actually hit and take out. So this team is very, very good, guys. I would argue, for me, with Starkiller obviously is one of my premier teams. If you guys watch any of my stuff, any of my streams, they have some of my best mods. I very rarely lose to Rey with my Starkiller. And this is probably what I would argue is the most difficult common version that I see for me to defeat with Starkiller. So really highly recommend that you guys look into using this team, especially if you've got L3 and Sortie up and viable on your teams, guys. It's really good. It's a massive upgrade over the Reylo team, in my opinion. Now, moving on to our next team, I would argue this is better than the droid team in certain circumstances. I would argue that this is probably a more difficult team to get and probably a more costly team to use, but it is a very good team nonetheless. And that is the Cal variant. So what we do basically is we have Cal replacing Sortie, and Barriss / maybe another character, we'll get to that in a second, replaces L3. So the reason Cal is so good in particular here, guys, is because he is another UFU and he has a lot of protection up built into his kit. Very similar to Sortie. The big difference is that Cal benefits more of the UFU squad like Rey and Ben and Rey JTR that Sortie doesn't. Sortie does not really have a lot of stuff in her kit that benefits the rest of the squad beyond L3. Cal does. So I would argue Cal is a big upgrade over Sortie. Even though he may not be as thick in the end of the story here with this, guys, in terms of what Sortie is, I still think he's actually a better player to throw in this team than Sortie herself is. Obviously, the downside is Cal is probably more difficult to get. A lot more of you are going to have Sortie than you will Cal, most likely. So he's a little bit costly, and plus, that means you're taking him off of that Seer team, which that really hurts. But maybe you're in the process of working on that team. You've got Cal Kestis up, but you don't have the rest of the team. This is a really good variant. Throw this guy in there, and he's going to make the team really difficult. The fifth character we have here is a little bit more flexible, guys. That is Barriss. I threw Barriss in here because obviously she has a lot of healing baked into her kit. Anytime you crit, she's going to be able to heal that team. The downside of Barriss here is that there's a lot of crit damage immunity built into this squad. And so her viability gets limited a little bit. It gets kind of handicapped some. It's still there. She still will heal you on crits whenever it does happen, but it's just not going to happen all the time. It's not like if you had like vulnerable built into everybody here on your team and suddenly it'd be almost impossible to kill them. But she is still very, very good here. The one I would argue that might work better than Barriss, and it's a little bit of a bigger ask in my opinion, but that would be General Kenobi. Anytime you can throw another tank on these Rey squads with Ben solo, it's a massive benefit, guys. I know it's a big ask because he's typically with a JMK team, but if you're using him like I do, the JMK squad that is, to take out Jabba's, I typically will throw Mace in there instead of General Kenobi, which means I can throw my General Kenobi in on this squad. I have done it before, and it has worked very well before, to be honest with you. It's a very tough team to beat. It's a very nuisance taunt, kind of like L3. There are cleanses built into it. There's foresight built into it. It's just another variant that you can throw in there, guys, if you have that roster flexibility that's going to make it very difficult for your opponent to defeat. Now, we're going to continue with the idea of General Kenobi here, guys, in our next team. We've got Hello There, Cat. And that version is including General Kenobi, like we just mentioned, and kind of all the benefits of having him there. But instead of having Cal in this squad, we're going to throw in Cat. So let's pretend that you don't have JMK. Maybe you're a very early game player that got the Lightspeed bundle, has Rey, but you have not gotten to JMK just yet. This is the team you want to run. This team is nasty. Super, super nasty. I mean, it will obliterate a lot of teams out there. I actually personally have not faced this with my Starkiller, and I would be very, very scared to, quite honestly. I think I probably would forego it and go with like a JML or something like that, because I would be really, really worried that Cat would just mess up my day with the Starkiller team against this. So obviously, guys, the benefit with Kenobi is he's a tank. He's going to make it really hard to take out Ben, which makes it hard to take out Rey, etc., etc. But Cat, the entire time this is happening, Cat is just slowly getting towards that little ultimate ability of hers, that Force Leap, and she's going to yeet one of your characters, and it's going to ruin your day. It will absolutely ruin your day. And the nice thing is, because she has a lot of roster flexibility in terms of what she can do and where she can go, she provides a lot of benefits to this squad as a whole. So specifically her own path here, guys. Light side unaligned force user. Okay. That's a big aspect of this. She shares a lot of this stuff, these abilities, so to speak, with other people. Specifically in this case, the bonuses are increased by 10% just for Galactic Republic and Scoundrel, so that doesn't apply as much. But this one, she shares all these bonuses with her light side allies. She's sharing all of that stuff with all of them. It's a huge increase in their stats across the team. It is just a massive, massive bump up in viability and difficulty. Yes, it's very costly. But like I said, if you are a newer player that doesn't have JMK yet, but you are lucky enough to have Cat and Kenobi, this, in my opinion, is where you should be going with this team. This team is extremely difficult to take out on defense. Now, we have discussed all of this, folks, without mentioning Datacrons at all, because I wanted to try to talk about this for those of you that don't have Datacrons, but we are going to include them because obviously it's a part of the game. We have to acknowledge Datacrons are there, and it can change the landscape of how these things work. For instance, the upcoming Cron that we have is going to feature Rey, as well as our first team here, Amilyn Holdo. And there's going to be a lot of resistance stuff built in. When Crons come into the picture, it can heavily affect what you run and how you do these teams. If you are lucky enough to unlock a Rey Cron or a Holdo Cron, and by the way, I think the Holdo Cron is actually going to be the better of the two, but if you've got either of those two Crons, I would significantly shift my approach to this team. What I would do is go for, obviously, the Reylo squad. You still want to have Ben on the team, everybody. But the difference is I probably would not have my Resistance Hero handbag rows here. I would put Amilyn Holdo in, and then maybe throw in another Resistance character just for fun. You could even get, kind of crazy. Maybe throw in like Barris still. There's a lot of viability in terms of what you do. But if you have a Datacron that is suddenly game-changing and makes one character or faction specifically better, remember that it's a great idea to consider using that team to get the full benefit of that Datacron. With that being said, we've kind of gone over 5 different teams here, guys. Obviously, 2 of them are teams that you really are probably very familiar with, kind of the OG squads. 3 of them that I would argue are more advanced and nuanced to defeat. And then we've talked about the Datacrons. The last team is a little bit of a bonus for you. Is a really unique team that would not exist outside of Datacrons. And this is why I'm saying take them into account, guys, because you can get some really crazy theory crafting happening and do some really weird things that your opponent's going to get thrown off with. And that team looks like this. I call it the Big Bam theory. So the Cron specifically that I have that I run with this, folks, it is the Bam Cron. I do not have Mandabo or, Bo-Katan Mandalore. So her Kron really is kind of useless to me. The Bam Kron is great, but I also don't think it's worth having him be on a scoundrel team by himself. And I feel like it's wasted a little bit on offense as well against the Lord Vader in this instance because of all the deflection and stuff that it's out there with those Krons that we have. Because of that, I decided to throw that Kron, the Bam Kron, with the protection up bonuses on the level 3s in on this team. And this team has gotten a lot of holds in GAC, guys. Mostly because people don't know what to do against it. You've got some taunt from IG3, or IG11, sorry, so you still have a tank in there. Kuil is sharing his stats with everybody. You still have difficulty defeating Rey because of Ben being there. You have the built-in damage immunity from Rey, plus you've got built-in damage immunity from Bam as well. And then when he goes into that poop stance, guys, with that Kron, he might literally nuke a GL. It has happened. I have seen it in the Swugga.gg reports. He has nuked GLs. It is really, really impressive what he can do. Now, again, bear in mind that once the Datacron is gone, folks, this team becomes, in my opinion, pretty much useless. But the whole point of this team, though, guys, is that don't let your mind stay in the box. Allow the Datacrons to get you to be a little bit creative and kind of venture outside of what you think is the standard. Because you never know what kind of a team you could throw together that's going to just totally throw off your opponent. In my opinion, that is the #1 most important thing about a solid GAC defense. Either A, have a strategy that's going to make them burn teams that they need, or B, create unique teams that your opponent has never seen and then they don't know what to do against it. Those are the two keys to winning GAC, in my opinion. And hopefully, the teams that you saw here today, guys, give you some unique ideas on what to do with your Rey moving forward so that you can kind of throw off your opponent and get some holds in GAC, guys. Or some wins if you're using it on offense as well. But anyway, hopefully you guys liked today's video. If you guys did, I would really appreciate it if you guys like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Really looking for that sub, guys. We are within 100 subs, guys, of getting monetized here on this channel. Would really, really, really appreciate it greatly, because I know there's a lot of you out there that are watching this content but aren't subbed. Give that sub, guys. It doesn't cost you anything. It's super easy to do. I'd really, really appreciate it greatly, guys. Last but not least, if you want to continue your journey down that Swugga rabbit hole, guys, make sure you check out the next video.